The man behind the mask. In the stillness of an autumn morning, a young woman stood on the terrace of a crumbling estate. Her name was Ottilie von Rabenhorst. The wind pulled gently at her dark hair as she looked out across the neglected gardens below. Her eyes were dry, but they held the weight of too many unshed tears. In less than a month, she would become the wife of a man she had never met, a duke, a stranger. And yet her heart felt not fear, but resignation. Duty, after all, left no room for dreaming. Hidden behind the overgrown hedges of the once glorious rose garden, a man watched her quietly. His clothes were plain, his hands calloused with dirt. To any servant passing by, he was merely Hinrich, the new gardener. But the truth lay beneath his silence. This was Konrad, Duke of Falkenstein, her future husband, and he had come not to be seen, but to see, to understand the woman fate had chosen for him, before titles, before vows. Gut Rabenhorst had once been one of the finest estates in the region. Now it stood as a shadow of its past, its windows cracked, its stone facades weathered by time. Yet the family who lived within still held their name with pride, even if the halls echoed more with memory than laughter. Ottilie was the last daughter of a noble line. Her father, the aging count, had exhausted the family wealth in failed ventures. Her mother had passed years ago. Her brother, Theodor, was a man lost in debts and distractions. The marriage to Duke Konrad had been arranged quietly. There had been no courtship, no exchange of letters, only a formal agreement between two old families, one in debt, the other in search of stability. For Ottilie, it meant sacrificing her freedom to save what was left of her family's name. For Konrad, it meant finding someone who could stand beside him as a duchess, nothing more. At least, that had been the plan. But Konrad was not a man of quick decisions. Scarred by the loss of his first wife and wary of noble alliances, he wished to meet this woman without the veil of expectation. And so he came to Gut Rabenhorst in disguise, as Hinrich, a name borrowed, a truth withheld. His presence was announced through a letter from the Duke's estate, a new servant to tend the gardens before the Duke's arrival. No one questioned it. Ottilie noticed him for the first time from her window, a quiet figure among tangled vines, working with care, never speaking unless spoken to. There was nothing remarkable about him, and yet something about his posture, the way he moved. There was control, even grace. She thought little of it. Just another pair of hands hired to restore the place before the wedding. To Konrad, every moment in that garden was a study. He watched the house, the staff, and most of all, her. Ottilie often walked alone early in the morning or late in the afternoon. She read in the library, played piano when no one was listening, and carried herself with quiet dignity. She was not cold, but distant. Not shy, but guarded. It was not bitterness he saw in her, but the memory of it. He had expected indifference. He found something else. Strength. Yet there were questions he could not answer. Why did she speak so little with her brother? Why did her eyes seem older than her years? What had broken her heart before he ever stepped onto the estate? The days passed slowly. Each one brought them closer in space, though still far in truth. She noticed how he handled the roses, carefully, almost reverently. He noticed how she paused before each sculpture in the overgrown path, as if recalling a time when it all had meaning. Sometimes they exchanged brief greetings, nothing more. But in those short moments, something unspoken began to form. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, Ottilie remained on the terrace longer than usual. Below, Hinrich trimmed the last rose vines before nightfall. A gust of wind caught her shawl, and it fluttered down into the garden. Without thinking, he caught it. Their eyes met for the first time. Neither spoke, and yet something passed between them. Not recognition, not affection, just awareness. A fragile thread had been spun. Back in his small servants' quarters, Konrad held the shawl longer than he should have before returning it. His mind was filled with questions. Was she truly what others had claimed, cold, reserved, distant, or was she simply surviving? He came to Rabenhorst to observe her. Now he was not so sure who was observing who. And as the Duke of Falkenstein lay awake that night beneath a plain servant's blanket, he wondered, was it possible to fall in love with someone who did not yet know who you truly were? The mask he wore was no longer protection. It had become the very thing that could cost him her trust. The morning sun spilled golden light across the worn stone floors of Rabenhorst's grand hall. Ottilie walked slowly, her footsteps echoing against the tall, faded walls. A servant had summoned her to her father's study. Her father, Count von Rabenhorst, once a man of great ambition, now weighed down by worry and years. She smoothed the folds of her dark green dress and knocked lightly before entering. The Count sat behind a heavy oak desk, surrounded by papers. The room smelled of old books and candle wax. When he looked up, his smile was thin, tired. "My daughter," he said, trying to sound pleased. "I have good news." Ottilie didn't sit. She didn't smile. She simply waited. Duke Konrad of Falkenstein has agreed to the marriage. Her heart sank. She had expected this, but not so soon. I thought. There was more time. There is no time, her father replied, gesturing toward the stacks of letters and ledgers. The Duke has offered a generous dowry. He will settle all our debts. It is the only way to save what is left of our name. Ottilie turned to the window. Outside, the once beautiful garden lay in quiet ruin. Her voice, when it came, was steady. When will he arrive? In 2 weeks. The wedding is planned for the autumn. 2 weeks. She gripped the windowsill as if the cold stone might steady her. Once she had dreamed of marrying for love, but love had left her 3 years ago when Count Leuthold had chosen a wealthier bride. She had not forgotten the shame. She had not forgotten the lesson. "Is he old?" she asked softly. 33, a widower. His wife died 2 years ago, in childbirth. So, not ancient, not entirely a stranger to grief. Her father added, "He is known to be a fair man. Stern, perhaps, but fair. The Falkensteins are an honourable family." Ottilie nodded, more out of duty than belief. "If you'll excuse me, father." She left the study with her back straight and her face composed. But the moment she stepped into the cold corridor, her fingers clenched into fists. Fair, just, generous. None of these words meant anything to her now, not when her future had been traded away like a coin purse. Her only solace lay in the overgrown garden. She walked there now, past cracked statues and tangled vines, to where silence offered comfort. In that same hour, miles away in Castle Falkenstein, Duke Konrad stood in his study, staring at the long valley stretching beyond the windows. His adviser, Friedrich, stood nearby with a folder of documents. "It is done," Friedrich said. "The betrothal will be announced in 2 weeks." Konrad nodded, but his expression remained distant. "What do we know of her?" Fräulein Ottilie von Rabenhorst, 22, educated, fluent in French and Latin, considered quiet, intelligent. There was talk of a broken engagement years ago, nothing confirmed. And the family? Formerly wealthy, now deeply indebted. The father invested in failed trade ventures. The brother? Unstable. A gambler. Konrad ran a hand through his short beard. Another marriage of convenience. He had done this before. His first marriage had been arranged, too. Elizabeth, a kind woman who had earned his respect, if not his love. When she died, part of him had gone with her. Since then, he had thrown himself into duty, trying to forget the weight of loneliness. But he had changed, and this time he wanted something different. "I want to see her," he said suddenly. Friedrich blinked. "Before the visit?" "Yes." "Before the lies begin? Before she wears her best smile and pretends to be someone else? I want to know the truth. You would go in disguise. I would go as a servant, quiet, unnoticed. 1 week, no more. It is highly irregular. So is marrying a stranger. Make the arrangements." By the next morning, everything was in motion. Letters were sent, clothes prepared, a new name chosen. Hinrich. Konrad left Castle Falkenstein, dressed in simple garments, his hands rubbed with earth to hide their softness. He rode alone, arriving at Rabenhorst by the servants' entrance. No one recognized him. "You're late," said the house steward, Herr Brinkmann, eyeing him with suspicion. "The letter said yesterday." "My horse went lame," Konrad replied, keeping his eyes low. "You'll be working the terrace and rose garden. They must be spotless. The Duke arrives in a week." Understood. His room was small, his bed hard, but through the narrow window he could see the garden, and in it, the first sign of movement, a woman in a long dress, walking alone, unaware that the man tending her roses already knew her name, already carried her future in his hands. From behind the mask of a servant, he would try to find the woman she truly was. Not the bride, not the countess, just Ottilie. What he didn't expect was that she, too, was hiding. And so, the game of shadows began. The sun had barely risen when Konrad stepped into the garden. The dew clung to the long grass like delicate glass, and mist still curled along the edges of the old stone path. He carried a pair of shears, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, and his hands, once trained for sword and signature, now bore the honest grime of labour. He had been Hinrich for 3 days. No one suspected. He rose with the other servants, ate in silence, and kept to his tasks. Yet his eyes missed little. The rhythms of Rabenhorst unfolded slowly, who passed through which corridor, which windows stayed closed, which voices lingered too long after dusk. But all his attention, truly, centered on her, Ottilie. Each morning she walked the garden, sometimes with a book, sometimes with only her thoughts. She moved like someone carrying the weight of too many decisions. She did not notice him, not at first, or perhaps she simply chose not to. Either way, he watched her from a distance, never staring, but never looking away. That morning she paused near the rose arbor, fingertips brushing a withered bloom. "These used to be my mother's," she said softly, not realizing she had spoken aloud. Konrad, standing a few paces behind, hesitated. Then he replied, voice quiet. "She had good taste. The soil here still remembers." Ottilie turned, startled. "I didn't see you there. I didn't mean to intrude, Fräulein. You're the new gardener?" "Yes, Hinrich." A pause. She studied him. "You speak more like a clerk than a labourer." Konrad smiled faintly. "I was a clerk once. Life changes." Her eyes lingered on him a moment longer, then drifted back to the roses. "They haven't bloomed properly in years. They need time, care, and someone who remembers what they once were." She nodded, almost imperceptibly, then walked away without another word. But the next morning she returned, and the next. By the end of the week it had become a ritual neither of them named. She came early, before breakfast. He was always there first, tending vines, pruning thorns. They spoke little, but when they did, the words held meaning. One day she asked, "Did your mother garden?" She did, in a smaller plot than this, but she loved it. She must have been patient. She had to be. She raised me alone. Ottilie was quiet for a moment. "Mine died when I was 15. After that, no one touched the garden. She would be glad you visit. I'm not sure she would recognize me anymore." The honesty in her voice struck him. Not sorrowful, not dramatic, just tired. She wore her sadness like a second skin, not to draw sympathy, but because she had no choice. He wanted to ask her more, about her brother, about the man who broke her heart, but he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he showed her how to prune a rose. She listened, hands steady, face thoughtful. At one point, their fingers brushed. Neither moved away. Days passed. A rhythm settled between them. Not courtship, not friendship. Something older, quieter. They spoke of Goethe and the stars, of weather and old songs. She laughed once, a short, surprised sound. He caught it like a gift. and slowly something changed in Ottilie, too. She began to linger after their conversations, asked questions, teased, sometimes gently. Her eyes still held caution, but the walls were no longer as high. Then one morning he found her already in the garden. She stood near the arbour, holding a thin book. "I thought perhaps you could read this to me. My eyes are tired." He knew it was a lie, but he said nothing. He took the book and sat beside her on the old stone bench. His voice filled the quiet morning. She listened. The chapter ended, but neither moved. The silence between them was soft. No promises, no truths yet revealed. Just presence. And yet Konrad felt the risk grow with every passing day. Because what had begun as observation was becoming something else, and she, unaware, was beginning to trust him. He had come to learn who she was, but now he feared what would happen when she learned who he was. The day was overcast. Pale clouds drifted slowly over the grey roof of Rabenhorst, casting a soft light over the gardens. Konrad stood beneath the pergola, brushing leaves from the stone table. A servant had told him that Fräulein Ottilie was expecting a guest. Coffee would be served on the terrace. He kept his hands busy, arranging cups, smoothing the cloth, adjusting the flowers. And then she arrived. Not alone. A young woman in a sky-blue gown, laughing easily, led the way. Behind her walked Ottilie in deep green velvet, graceful as always, but more reserved than usual. Konrad straightened, lowered his head in a servant's bow. The blonde woman smiled at him in passing. Ottilie's gaze barely flickered in his direction. They sat. The visitor spoke quickly, her voice bright and curious. "Tell me everything," she demanded. "This duke of yours, what is he like? Is he terribly old? Does he walk with a cane?" Ottilie raised her cup, expression unreadable. "I haven't met him," she said calmly. "You haven't? Oh, Ottilie, that's either deeply romantic or deeply foolish." "It's necessary," she replied. "It's a marriage, not a dream." From the garden's edge, Konrad listened in silence, trimming a branch that did not need trimming. Dorothea, as he learned the friend was called, leaned in closer. "They say he has a scar from a duel across his cheek. Makes him look dangerous, handsome in a tragic way." Ottilie gave a small shrug. "Perhaps, but I'm not marrying him for his face." Konrad allowed himself a faint smile. The only scar he had was on his chin from a fall as a boy. But her tone struck deeper than jest. She meant it. "I give him a name," Ottilie continued. "He gives me a future. That is the nature of it." "And love?" Dorothea asked softly. Ottilie did not answer at once. She looked out over the overgrown garden. "Love," she said at last, "is a luxury I no longer believe in." Silence. Konrad's hands stopped. She stood and walked toward the edge of the terrace, cup in hand. Her voice, when she spoke again, was lower. "I once thought love would be enough, that choosing with your heart meant choosing rightly. I was wrong." Dorothea said nothing. She only reached for her friend's hand, gently. "It doesn't have to be like before," she whispered. "No," Ottilie agreed. "It could be worse." She turned and walked back into the house. Konrad remained still, rooted in place. He had known this marriage was one of duty, but hearing her speak so plainly, so coldly, stripped the illusion from it. She did not want him, not even as a man, much less as a partner. She wanted escape, safety. And he, who had begun to feel more than duty, was no longer sure if he was building a bridge or chasing a shadow. That evening he sat on the edge of his narrow cot, staring at the handkerchief still wrapped around his thumb. A week ago he had been a stranger. Now she had bound his wound with her own. But her words that afternoon echoed louder than any gesture. A marriage is a transaction, not a dream, not love. And yet, the next morning, she returned to the garden. She watched him work in silence, then picked up a pair of shears herself. "Show me again," she said. Konrad met her eyes. Something in her expression had shifted. Not warmth, not trust, but a kind of opening, small and uncertain. So he showed her how to hold the stem, where to cut, when to let go. She listened closely, followed every instruction. After a while she asked, "Do you believe in love?" He paused. "I did," he said slowly. "I'm not sure if I stopped." She nodded, said nothing more, but when she handed him back the shears, their fingers touched again. This time she didn't pull away. The morning began with silence. Ottilie didn't appear in the garden. The bench beneath the rose arbor stayed empty. The book she often carried was not on the table. Konrad felt the absence like a missing heartbeat. He worked slowly, pruning roses more out of habit than focus. Every so often he glanced toward the house. No sign of her. The morning passed. The sun climbed higher, but the air remained heavy. By mid-afternoon, Konrad saw movement at the far side of the estate. 2 men walking briskly toward the main house, one of them tall and red-haired, the other unmistakably Theodor. He stepped back into the shade, watching from a distance. Baron Westerholz. Konrad had seen his face once before at a political gathering. He remembered the man's smile charming, practiced, and false. Now he was here. As soon as the Baron disappeared inside, Konrad followed quietly, slipping through the servants' corridor. He made his way to the old library, where voices carried through the thick wooden door. "You promised me this would be clean," Theodor whispered. "No danger." "And it will be," Westerholz replied. "Once the marriage is sealed, the documents will surface. The debts will fall on him. You'll be in charge of managing the estate. Your sister will thank you. She doesn't know. She doesn't need to. The Duke will sign what he must. And if he grows suspicious—" A pause. "We deal with it. Discreetly." Konrad felt a chill pass through him. He stepped away before his anger betrayed him. In his chamber that evening, he sat in silence. So, this was the plan? A forged debt. A trap. And Theodor, Ottilia's brother, was in the middle of it. But was Ottilie? He couldn't believe she was involved. Not the woman who read poetry in the garden and touched rose petals like they carried memory. And yet she had never spoken of her brother in more than vague terms. She had never trusted easily. And now, neither could he. Later that night, he crept to the library again. No voices this time. The room was dark, the fireplace cold. He searched quickly, but found nothing, until his foot caught on a loose board under the desk. Beneath it, a folder. Inside, drafts of legal documents, some bearing a seal. One even had the name Konrad von Falkenstein scrawled across the top in a shaky hand not his own. He tucked them away beneath his tunic. In the hallway, he nearly collided with her. Ottilie. She stood in a pale robe, her hair loose, her eyes wide. "What are you doing?" she asked. He searched for words. "I heard something. Thought I saw someone near the garden." She narrowed her eyes, but didn't press. "Be careful," she said quietly. "Not all shadows are empty." Then she turned and left. He didn't sleep that night. By morning, she was in the library, alone, a pile of books open on the desk. She was flipping through old financial records, brow furrowed. He entered cautiously. "You weren't in the garden," he said gently. "I had. Something to check." He hesitated. "I need to ask you something." She looked up. "Do you trust your brother?" A long pause. "I love him," she said. "But trust?" She closed the book. "I found a paper in his desk, a copy of a debt document, with your name on it." He watched her carefully. "You knew?" "I suspected." "And now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I can't look away anymore." They stood in silence. "You're not who you say you are you?" she asked suddenly. He didn't answer, but he didn't deny it. Her gaze didn't leave his. "I don't know what you're hiding. But if there's something worse than betrayal," she said softly, It's silence. Then she turned back to her books, leaving him with more questions than before. The air was tense at Rabenhorst. The servants whispered. The maids moved faster. The silver was polished twice. In the great hall, flowers had been arranged and rearranged. The Duke was expected that evening. But Konrad was already there. He walked the edge of the garden, the familiar paths now filled with uncertainty. In his pocket, the forged documents. In his chest, a truth too heavy to hide any longer. He had sent word to his adviser, Friedrich. The man would arrive by nightfall, bringing his formal entourage, and with it, the identity he had concealed for days. The time had come. But before the carriages could be heard, he needed to speak to her. Ottilie. He searched the house, but she was not in her chamber, not in the library, nor the garden. Finally, he found her in the old greenhouse, standing among broken pots and wild plants. She turned sharply when she saw him. In her hand, a letter. His letter, the one he thought lost. I believe this is yours, she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were not. He froze. I found it yesterday, on the library floor, addressed to His Grace and Duke of Falkenstein, with details of a disguise, of a plan. She held it up like evidence. So it's true. Ottilie, you lied to me. I wanted to know you, without masks. And instead, you wore one. I never meant to deceive you cruelly. But you did deceive me, she said. You stood beside me, looked into my face, and said nothing. He stepped forward. You said love was a luxury, that you no longer believed in it. And You thought I would love you more if I thought you were a servant, she interrupted. Or if I pitied you, or trusted someone who had no power over my future. No, he said quietly. I didn't want you to trust the title or the fortune, just the man. But the man lied. There was a pause, then footsteps. The door behind them opened. Theodor entered, followed by Baron Westerholz. Both stopped when they saw them. Well, Westerholz said, his smile cold. It seems the mask has slipped. Ottilie looked from the Baron to her brother, then to Konrad. You knew? She asked Theodor. Theodor looked down. It was his plan, he muttered. The documents. The trap. You only agreed, she finished. Westerholz stepped forward. I don't know what lies you've told, Your Grace, but if you believe a servant can undo what is written in law... Konrad stood tall. The mask was gone. The documents are forged, and I have proof. He reached into his coat and pulled the folder from beneath it. Enough to bring charges. Westerholz's eyes narrowed. Then I suppose I have nothing to lose. In one swift motion, he lunged forward. Konrad caught the movement a second too late, but not late enough. He blocked the strike, pushing the Baron back. Theodor froze. Ottilie cried out, but the struggle lasted only seconds. Heavy footsteps echoed behind them as Friedrich burst through the door, flanked by 2 guards. The Baron was disarmed, taken, silenced. The greenhouse fell still again. Konrad turned to Theodor. You will be dealt with. And then, to Ottilie, she said nothing, only watched him. Later, as the evening sky turned to violet, the estate filled with noise, the arrival of the Duke, the ceremony of title. But to Ottilie it all felt distant. On the terrace where it all began, she stood alone. He found her there. Neither spoke for a long time. At last he said, I'm sorry. She didn't move. Not for the truth, but for the way I gave it to you. She turned to him. I don't know if I can forgive you. I won't ask that, he said. I only ask that you remember who I was before the name. Her eyes were tired, but not hard. I remember too much, she said. He nodded. Then I will wait, until the memory is enough. And with that, he left her with the stars. Autumn came early that year. The trees surrounding Rabenhorst shifted into gold and copper. The wind grew cooler. The estate, though quiet, no longer felt tense. The danger had passed. But between Ottilie and Konrad, the silence remained. They spoke politely when required, shared a meal when custom demanded it. But the closeness that had grown in the garden was gone, replaced by careful distance. Until one evening, a quiet dinner had ended. The guests retired early. Ottilie, in a deep red gown, stepped out onto the terrace. The air smelled of smoke and fallen leaves. Above her, stars scattered across a clear night sky. Konrad stood nearby, hands clasped behind his back. He waited, uncertain. "Your playing was beautiful tonight," he said, referring to the piece she had performed at the piano. "Thank you," she answered, her tone neutral. "My mother insisted on lessons. She believed every lady should play." He stepped closer. "And what do you believe?" She looked at him. "I believe music is easier than people." He didn't disagree. A pause followed. Then she asked, "Why did you come here as a servant, really?" "I told you. I want to hear it again, not from the Duke, from you." He took a breath. "I wanted to know if there was something beyond duty, beyond names. I wanted to see you before the mask, before mine and yours. And I was afraid that if I came as the Duke, I would never know the truth." She nodded slowly. "I trusted Hinrich," she said. "He was kind. He listened. He didn't judge." "And Konrad?" he asked gently. She turned her face away. "I don't know him yet." He accepted that, waited. A leaf drifted past between them. "I've made mistakes," he said, "but none so great as thinking trust could be stolen." She met his eyes then. "No," she said, "only lost, and maybe found again." There was silence, then a sound from the doorway. "Theodor." He stepped onto the terrace, pale, uncertain. "I don't want to interrupt," he said quietly. "You already have," Ottilie replied, but not cruelly. He hesitated, then said, "I wanted to thank you, both of you, for not destroying me when you could have." "You nearly destroyed yourself," she said. He lowered his head. "I know. I'm trying to be better." Konrad nodded. "You have time." Theodor offered a small bow, then disappeared back into the house. When he was gone, Ottilie sighed. He was always reckless, but never cruel. "And you?" She turned to him. "I was never brave." "I think you were," he said. "Brave enough to speak the truth when I didn't deserve it." Another pause. The wind rustled through the rose garden below. She stepped forward. "I don't know what I want, Konrad. I don't know if I can feel what I'm supposed to feel." He didn't move. "You don't have to," he said. "There's no rule, no clock, no condition." Her voice dropped. "Do you still love me?" He didn't hesitate. "I do." She looked at him long. Then she said softly, "Then let's begin again." He offered his hand, not as a duke, not as a man who had lied, simply as himself. She took it. The stars above blinked cold and distant, but in the garden below, something warm began to bloom again. Not all beginnings come with fanfare. Some begin with silence and forgiveness.